You're entering Corsi Nation.
This is Jerome Corsi. Today it's April 16th, 2025. Thanks for joining us on CorsiNation.com. You can follow me on X at CorsiJerome1 and on Substack at JeromeCorsiPhD.substack.com. We're doing Substacks almost every day. Okay, first story I think is a major story that an article that I've written with General Flynn. And I'm very honored to have written this article with General Flynn. It's in American Thinker. And I'm just going to pull it up here and we'll discuss it. But the article is that Trump's national security emergency investigation into election fraud is ongoing. Now, this article that is going to surprise people because people are saying, well, Trump's doing nothing about election security, despite all the election fraud that's been pointed out since 2020. Well, don't mistake this, because Trump has said from the very beginning that he wanted to prove that the 2020 election was stolen. He's going to prove it. So what Trump did is, and people have to understand these kind of subtle moves that have huge consequences. Last Friday, Tulsi Gabbard, at that televised cabinet meeting, if you'll remember, she said that there was an ongoing intelligence agency investigation that had evidence that election computers are vulnerable to cyber attack hackers. And so what we now have evidence, General Flynn and I are writing, that where President Trump is going is he's heading to a election fraud national security emergency. Now, on March 24th, just a few days ago, really, when President Trump issued the executive order, which was called Preserving and Protecting the Integrity of Elections, and that called for voter ID and proof of citizenship to vote, Trump acted under the Article 2 executive powers as commander and chief. Now, this places it beyond the lawfare. So, you know, the Democrats, the Democrat communist traitors, it's now a Democrat Communist Traitor Party. It's no longer. I'm getting sick of calling them Democrats. You know, somebody posted on. We just had the assassination of Lincoln's annual, anniversary on April 14th, I believe, and a couple of days ago. And of course, when John Wilkes Booth jumped from the stage and broke his leg after shooting Lincoln in the back of his head like a coward, he said "Sic semper tyrannis," which is "that's always the tyrant." So, Booth was killing Lincoln in the name of democracy, just like the current Democrat communist traitors talk about democracy and say they have to get rid of Trump because Trump is not for democracy. Well, it just shows who's right and who's wrong. Okay, so Trump is going to say to these 19 Democratic state attorneys that have filed lawsuits claiming that this executive order on election integrity is unconstitutional because it violates the Constitution's mandate delegating to the state legislatures the power to determine how presidential elections are held. Well, that's out the window if there's a national security emergency and China is hacking into our elections. And what Andrew Paquette proved was that, in fact, our elections are being penetrated because there's codes being placed in the state boards of election computers. How to get there? Who are the criminals? We'll get to that in a minute. But what surfaced here, and General Flynn reminded me that on January 7th, 2021, John Radcliffe, who was then the director of national intelligence, he's now heading the CIA, wrote a memo called Intelligence Community Assessment, Foreign Threats to the 2020 U.S. Elections. In that he stated that the People's Republic of China sought to influence the 2020 U.S. federal elections in a move that raised the need for the intelligence community to address the underlying issues with China. Now, that was on January 7th. Okay, and Radcliffe further stressed that within the Obama CIA and the traitorous Obama criminal communist Muslim Obama, he was pressuring analysts who were descending from the Russian collusion narratives to downplay reports that China was influencing U.S. elections. That was not undue influence or interference. What Obama wanted to do was give the false impression that Russia sought to influence the 2020 election, but China did not. Well, Radcliffe knew that was a lie, and he published this on January 7th. Now, the unfortunate thing is January 6th was the day Mike Pence cowardly went to Congress and said, oh, well, the president's election 2020 is certified, and we're not going to object to anybody or anything else in terms of it might be questioned that there was fraud. But had Radcliffe's memo been issued just 2 days earlier, Pence, if he had integrity and the courage of his convictions, and I've supported Pence for a long time, okay, for his belief in Jesus Christ and his religion, which always impressed me. At any rate, if Pence had the courage of his convictions and had Radcliffe's memo been issued 2 days earlier, Pence might have challenged the 2020 election at that joint meeting of Congress for certification. And had Pence challenged the 2020 election, we might never have the J6 protest march on Congress that led the radical left to bust in all these people and dress them up as Trump supporters and cause a riot. So the left could do all these unjust insurrection, quote unquote, prosecutions. The left is really the insurrectionists. They're the traitors. Okay, well, since then, we've gotten increasing evidence that Radcliffe is correct. I mean, in November, the Washington Post even reported that China-linked hackers had penetrated Verizon, AT&T, and Lumen Technologies to collect audio calls of U.S. politicians and their staff. Okay, clearly monitoring elections. An operation called Salt Typhoon. 1 month later, during a meeting in Geneva with Biden officials, China admitted to hacking American infrastructure due to U.S. support of Taiwan. Okay, so all this led, and if you didn't connect the dots here, on April 4th, 2025, Trump fired National Security Director Timothy Howe and NSA, National Security Agency Director Wendy Noble. Okay, now that puts strong notice to John Brennan, former Obama CIA director, and Clapper, who was Obama's director of national intelligence, that Trump is coming after them. And he's coming after them for Russian collusion. He's coming after them for not securing our elections. He's coming after them probably for treason charges. Brennan's a communist. Brennan voted for Gus Hall. Most of you probably don't know, but he was a communist in the 1950s, and Brennan was voting for him. We had a communist head of the CIA who hated Trump and was in on the inner circle of Crossfire Hurricane going after Trump. I wrote about that in my book, Coup d'etat, about Obama's coup d'etat, trying to steal the 2020 election, which he did. All right, so the Associated Press, is now reporting that, the election officials have said that this was just a recent report. This just was done a few days ago, where the AP was saying that election officials have said recent elections have been the most secure in U.S. history. There has been no indication of any widespread fraud, including when Trump, a Republican, lost to Joe Biden, a Democrat, in 2020. Now, the Associated Press, Donald Trump has been trying to kick out of the White House because it's a lousy, communist reporting, treasonous organization that won't tell the truth. Well, what the AP was doing was they were repeating this statement from Christopher Krebs, who was the former Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. He's the director of that. And Trump terminated Krebs on November 18th, 2020, right after the election, for making these highly inaccurate statements on voter integrity. Krebs has been out there saying 2020 election is the most secure we ever had. BS. Lie. Criminal lie. Covering up what he knew to be a crime on stealing the election. Okay, so the mainstream media also didn't report recently, April 9th, 2025, when we had a presidential memo entitled Addressing Risks from Chris Krebs and the Government Censorship. Okay, now that presidential memo, Trump revoked Krebs' security clearance. He stressed that Krebs, through CISA, falsely and basely denied that the 2020 election was rigged and stolen, including by inappropriately and categorically dismissing widespread malfeasance and serious vulnerabilities with the voting machines. That same memo, Trump ordered Attorney General Pam Bondi and Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem to investigate this Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA's, activities over the past 6 years to determine if CISA's conduct was contrary to his January 20th executive order, which was restoring freedom of speech and ending federal censorship. In other words, Trump is on to the fact that Krebs was trying to run a narrative, a lying CIA narrative that the AP was parroting, saying the 2020 election was honest. All this was a prelude to the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard's announcement on this April 11th, last Friday, during a televised cabinet meeting. Kristi Noem said, just listen to these words. We have evidence of how these electronic voting systems have been vulnerable to hackers for a very long time and vulnerable to exploitation to manipulate the results of votes being cast. We have evidence of how these voting systems have been vulnerable to hackers. Listen to that. Okay, and manipulating votes being cast, which further drives forward your President Trump's mandate to bring about paper ballots across the country so that voters can have faith in our elections. Now, that was the announcement that made clear that Gabbard was on to the work we're doing in God's Five Stones. That's G-O-D, no apostrophe S, F-I-V-E, you spell out 5, S-T-O-N-E-S, plural, godsfivestones.com. Andrew Paquette has shown that there are these cryptographic algorithms embedded in the State Board of Election voter registration systems that allow bad actors to create duplicate votes who then are voted before being deleted. Okay, it also validates Gabbard's statements, the work done by people like, brilliant work by Sidney Powell, Patrick Byrne, Mike Lindell, and many, many others, produce evidence that the electronic tabulation systems used to count votes in presidential elections are vulnerable to foreign interference. As long as it's a machine, electronic machine, China can hack it. And China is now admitting hacking it. Okay, so countering, so centering the election fraud, not in DOJ, Pam, I won't say Blondie, Pam Bondi, doesn't seem to be doing it. But Dan Bongino, by the way, put out a statement yesterday with Kash Patel saying just because it doesn't look like we're doing anything doesn't mean we're not doing anything. Just wait and see all the great things that are coming. Yeah, well, I'm waiting to see. That's because what Trump did is he bypassed DOJ, he bypassed Bondi, and he gave the investigation of election fraud to Tulsi Gabbard. That's big because it means it's now a national intelligence and national security investigation, which puts this all under the president's power as commander-in-chief. Okay, so all this series of events is establishing Trump's contention that there are foreign actors interfering in our elections, possibly with the cooperation of the CIA. Okay, and Radcliffe is now at the CIA. Radcliffe knows about the Chinese hacking into our election systems. Okay, and what Peter Titkin, who I'm working with, Peter T-I-C-K-T-I-N, president's attorney, has a law firm in Deerfield Beach, Florida, and Peter's working on voter security. He's filed charges in Florida that the election for Rocky Rockford for the House of Representatives was stolen. And that case is proceeding. There are motions on that case today. And Peter Titkin gets his way, they'll be televised. President Trump understands that our state, this is what Peter Titkin said, President Trump understands our state voter registration lists are corrupted and the computers that run our elections are not secure. He said, given the importance of voting rights to our freedom, President Trump also understands we cannot sit by idly while our existing computer electronic election systems are vulnerable to cyber attacks by foreign nations, foreign nationals. Okay, so The brilliance of Trump's second term, it's not yet 100 days old, is that Trump, even though he's stymied by apparent Department of Justice and FBI foot dragging, is determined to expose the 2020 election fraud. And he's pivoting from a DOJ investigation being led, or the FBI, which has all these old legacy FBI in there. They come and tell you how they're going to help you. I'd fire the whole bunch of them. Anybody, if I were heading the Department of Justice right now, and somebody came to me and said, I'm here to help you, I'd say, good, I want your resignation on my desk by 5 o'clock. I'll get rid of the whole damn bunch of them. I think, the statements I'm seeing, the best way to, I guess Bannon said this yesterday, the best way to deal with the DOJ is to bulldoze the building. I think he's right. Let's see if Pam Bondi and Kash Patel and Bongino have the cojones to do something about it. Okay, so President Trump is right. A national security emergency exists. If the CIA's 1950 plan to intervene in foreign elections has morphed into an open door for foreign nations to intervene in domestic elections, how can we continue to ignore that the Communist Chinese Party has the computer technology not only to go after our infrastructure, but also our election computer infrastructure? Okay, so I'm working directly with Peter Titkin in his law firm, the Tickton Law Firm in Deerfield Beach, Florida, in election inquiry, election security. Peter Titkin's quotation in the article was given to me for publication by Peter, and I worked directly with General Flynn in putting this together. It was General Flynn who remembered that and noted the importance of Radcliffe's memorandum, January 7th, 2021. General Flynn doesn't miss much. He's one of the sharpest intelligence analysts I've ever seen. I greatly, greatly admire him. And General Flynn and I both suffered the Mueller investigation where they were trying to put both of us in prison. It was a horrible time for both of us. And I've met recently with General Flynn personally in Florida and am honored to be able to co-author this article with him. Thank you, General Flynn. Now, following it up, we also see, and Chris, I'm going to ask you to comment on this in a minute, but yesterday, very not much noticed article, the Department of Homeland Security was in Arizona. Okay, and Arizona, of course, went for Donald Trump in last year's election. But what the Department of Homeland Security did is that they got Arizona to agree in quotes, to remove something like 50,000 illegal foreigners, non-citizens who were on the Arizona voter rolls for the 2024 election. So in 2024, Director of Race and Ethnic Research at Pew Research Center, Mark Hugo Lopez, estimated around 250,000 undocumented immigrants live in Arizona. Okay, and evidently there were something like 50,000 of them on the state Board of Election voter registration rolls for the 2024 election. Okay, so they've agreed to now. So the Department of Homeland Security is going to review Arizona's voter rolls and verify the citizen status of voters, according to court documents reviewed by Newsweek. Evidently, there's like 50,000 they intend to remove. Now, the implications of this article are far-reaching. Chris, I want you to comment in a minute. I have some discussion on this point. It's one of the most important. This is a major development that has been ignored by the mainstream media, but we are going to blast it out here. The point is, if the Department of Homeland Security is in there with a proctoscope looking at Arizona's voter registration file, and they're finding how much fraud there is in that file, it's one step away from invalidating the 2024, especially down ballot elections in Arizona, which has big implications for Kari Lake and also this other woman who's in prison right now because these Arizona Democrat communist traitors are trying to protect a corrupt election. Now, DHS is in there, and I suspect that first they're going to remove probably thousands of illegal registrations in Arizona. They're going to get to the bottom of whether there's algorithms in there, the election. And I definitely plan to jump on this and be able to offer help to Tulsi Gabbard. We offer the assistance of Andrew Paquette, who's already found algorithms in Arizona, I believe. We found them virtually every state we've looked at. In fact, not virtually, actually every state we've looked at. The voter rolls in the states are absolutely corrupt, filled with codes, false voters, modified duplicates. These are an embarrassing set of records. You couldn't run a company based on the records. Our government is incapable of doing anything right. We have millions of people we're paying Social Security to are non-existent or non-citizens. You can't get a birth certificate out of a state anymore. The government is dysfunctional. I'm for shutting down the entire government and firing everybody. All 2 million of these workers who work for the federal government, all they do come day is play their computer games on their computers and talk to their friends on government time. I don't know if any of them are doing any work for the government. Very few. Okay, at any rate, if DHS is in Arizona and they invalidate the election, the next thing they're going to do is find out who the criminals are. So again, Carrie Lake and this woman in prison, Chris will give me her name. These things can be changed now. And if DHS is in Arizona, DHS is going to be in every state in the union. And they are going to get these goddamn criminals out of there. Excuse my language. I'm sick of this. We've had the Democrats be as traitor Obama and letting Clinton run their foundation, which was a criminal foundation, and nobody did anything about it. She stole money from Haiti when they went through an earthquake. She stole money in India. She stole money in Africa. The Clintons are criminals. They're grifters. They stole the furniture out of the White House when they left the White House. They had to return it. I wrote a book, Partners in Crime. It's time for this to end. And if Pam Bondi and Kash Patel can't do the job, then we'll find somebody who can. And Dan Bongino's in there, and they all flap their mouths about what they're going to do when they get there, and they do nothing. Then it's not my fault that they're gone. If they can't do their jobs, they can't clean that joint out, then bulldoze it. We don't need a Department of Justice if it's a Department of Injustice, and all it does is protect people. I'm going to get to Letitia James in a minute. Chris, you want to come on? I'd like to hear what your thoughts are.
What we're seeing in Arizona is what we're going to be seeing in a lot of other states at this point. I saw the cabinet meeting. It was live streaming when Tulsi Gabbard said that this investigation is going to happen. And I assumed it was ongoing. This is something they really can't talk about. But it's interesting the magnifying glass is on Arizona because there were a lot of issues with the 2020 election. You saw what happened in Maricopa County recently over the years. You saw what happened in some of the districts with the voting machines. And the guy that was running the elections, the State Department was denying everything and trying to reflect the blame back on everybody else. The idea is to call anybody who questions you an election denier. Now the weight of the Intelligence Department and all this evidence that you, Andrew Paquette, and Mr. Tickton and others have presented. This isn't a fake Kraken or anything. This is real.
Yeah. Okay. So the election official, Tina Peters is her name. And she is now sentenced to 9 years in prison. And, she basically released some voting data trying to get the crimes that noticed. But, she was allowed somebody to use a security card to access the Mesa County election system. And so they're saying she's an election denier. They put her in prison for 9 years, this woman. All she was trying to do is blow the whistle on election fraud. And her life is in danger in prison.
Yeah, they have to silence her. That's the idea. They're silencing critics. They're using her as an example.
Well, notice Trump was also going after this Krebs and tying it to censorship. He was talking. Trump is. People got to appreciate how brilliant Trump really is, and how much he has this all together. That he knows that what the Democrat communist traitors are doing is they're trying to say the election 2020 was most secure we've ever had, and anybody who says it's an election denier, Then they put this woman in prison for trying to tell the truth, Tina Peters.
Hmm.
And the censorship and the AP is going right along. AP is a disgraceful organization. It ought to be shut down. And after you shut down AP, shut down Reuters. And after you shut down Reuters, shut down the New York Times and shut down the Washington Post. These are all traitorous organizations right now. They won't tell you the truth. And all they're doing is repeating propaganda that comes out of our CIA, another agency that ought to be shut down because it was run by Brennan and Clapper. And all they did was go after Donald Trump. Go ahead, Chris.
On the simplest level, the media and Democrat establishment, they use the term election denier as another means to shut people up, because that kind of is a Pavlovian to a lot of people. When they hear the word denier, they usually hear that in context with Holocaust denier, those crazy people who don't believe the Holocaust existed. So if the media and the Democrat establishment equates anybody who questions an election's results or the integrity of an election, they become a denier, and they become something akin to a Holocaust denier. As
Yeah, it's
another means to shut them up and say, oh
like
yeah, throw her in prison for 9 years.
like I said, birthers. We're birthers.
That's
Well, I
birthers.
found the birth certificate from which Obama's was copied, and I found it in Hawaii. And Sheriff Arpaio took him a couple of years, but he had forensic exams say that was the birth certificate from which Obama copied certain fields to make it look like he had a long form birth certificate in Hawaii, and then filled in his false information. Okay, and that's another lie. Okay, so but we were birthers for daring to raise the issue that we don't know where Obama was born. I think he was probably born in Indonesia, quite frankly.
A conspiracy theorist is harmless until they're onto something.
Well, and then all the conspiracy theories are being proven conspiracy
Yes,
facts.
exactly. That's why they're being silenced.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, the next story. Okay. So a criminal referral has now been demanded of DOJ. Of course, I hope it doesn't get lost over there with Pam Bondi. Okay, Pam Bondi. I mean, I'm slipping back and forth between the two. Okay, against Letitia James, who is the New York Attorney General. If you think for a minute that Trump forgets these things, all that Trump went through, I was through it myself. And broke up my 32-year marriage. My wife was supportive of me when they wanted to put me in prison. I didn't take their plea deal because I was not going to lie that I had tied to Julian Assange. That I didn't. They were threatening to bring me before a jury in Washington that would put me in prison the rest of my life, even if I was innocent. I said, well, you better get ready to put me in prison the rest of my life because I'm not going to lie to keep myself out of prison. That's when they closed down the Russian collusion investigation because they couldn't have the link they thought I had to Assange. I had not any contact with Assange. I just figured out that Assange had Podesta's emails. It's a long story. But the point is that they're the liars. Okay, and I know that my wife, after a year or so later, had an affair and divorced me. 2023 in April. That's now 2 years ago. So I've been living through 2 years of hell with a divorce after 32 years, having gone through the hell of thinking I was going to prison the rest of my life. All right, now, Trump went through more prosecutions and indictments than anybody. How he did it with such courage and such a positive attitude is still a marvel to me. I greatly admire Donald Trump. Okay, now this criminal referral against New York Attorney General Letitia James has been filed with the DOJ, and that she used falsified records to get home loans for a Virginia property that she claimed was her, quote, principal residence in 2023 while she was serving as a New York State prosecutor buying property in Virginia. So Federal Housing Finance Agency Director William Pulte sent the missive to Attorney General Pam Bondi and Deputy AG Todd Blanche, claiming that late August 2023, weeks before she launched her civil fraud trial against the Trump Organization for inflating the value of her properties. In 2021, James also purchased a 5-family Brooklyn property that has, quote, consistently misrepresented the same property as only having 4 units in both building permit applications and numerous mortgage documents and applications. That's what the letter said, even though that was a lie. But the loan secured for that property could have reduced her mortgage interest rates by as much as 1%, leaving James with lower monthly payments on the Brooklyn property. Under the federal Home Assistance Modification Program, since it was listed as containing just 4 units. Okay, now she's a criminal, and let's see what happens to her. But Trump is now determined to get these criminals, and all the state board of election officials who thought they were so clever stealing elections better lawyer up, because there's treason charges involved here. Our election security is one of our most important rights as American citizens. And if this is challenged by these smart jerks who think that they can steal elections by algorithms in the state board of elections, they never expected that a genius like Andrew Paquette would discover these algorithms. And God's Five Stones has made a point of it. They did not use the algorithms in the 2024 presidential election because we would have caught them. You could see that they would stop counting. They'd produce all these bogus mail-in ballots. They'd run them through the machines, and suddenly Biden was up ahead. Well, they did that in the down-ballot elections, like Rocky Rockford's. And Peter Tickton is going to prove that in court. And the Department of Homeland Security on your case, I think, is more significant and important and scary to these people. It should be, than having the Department of Justice. Because the Department of Homeland Security and the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard's after you. You've committed treason, perhaps. This is the intelligence agency investigation. This is this is quasi-military. All Trump has to do is issue a national security emergency direction, and he can send in the military to seize the computers and the records of every board of election in the country. And then he can find out who the criminals are by doing a forensic analysis of the servers of these state boards of election. They think they're real clever. Well, those servers will run a machine code, zeros and ones, and there's a compiler in there which compiles the zeros and ones into higher level programming instructions. That compiler will tell you everything that computer's done. That's why Hillary Clinton had to scrub and wash her computers to make sure the compilers didn't show her crimes, and having her separate email server system when she was Secretary of State. Hillary Clinton commits crimes, and Comey says, well, it was really bad, but she didn't mean to be criminal. Well, maybe Comey himself is a criminal. Okay, so these people who thought they were so clever, including Fauci, and the list goes on, are about to face justice. And if it's not going to be done by DOJ, if we can't find somebody who'll go in and clean that place up, I mean, it wouldn't take me 20 minutes. I'd say, okay, my first order of business is I want everybody's resignation on my desk by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Everybody. I want the secretaries. I want the dogs. I want everybody, the canines. Let's get everybody's resignation on my desk by 9 o'clock. And then I'm going to accept them all. I'm going to start over. Because if they're there, they're corrupt. If they're there, they participated in Operation Crossfire Hurricane. If they're there, they're complicit in something. And I don't care what cases they've got going or what they've done. I'm now starting to champion for pardon different people who have been harassed by these criminals in our law enforcement agencies and prosecuted for crimes they didn't commit. And believe me, I understand that because they tried to do that to me. Just like Donald Trump, these people went too far. Now, I want to cover a couple more stories before we run out of time today, but this one is a major breaking story, and General Flynn is joining me on it. And so I think we've got here the country needs to understand what Donald Trump is doing, because the moves are subtle unless you understand how the government works. Donald Trump just gave this, said, okay, Department of Justice, I don't know what you're going to do, but I don't care anymore because I've now given it to Tulsi Gabbard and she's going to do something. It didn't take Tulsi Gabbard 20 minutes to get down to Arizona. Okay, well, the next state she's going to go to could be Wisconsin, where they just stole a judgeship. It could be, Florida. And Pam Bondi, I think, still might be in love with DeSantis. I can't figure that out. I know she loves being on Fox. I certainly do being on Fox more than she's done any indictments since she's been there, or now announced any criminal investigations. I'm sick of hearing what she's gonna do. I want to see some action. Okay, so moving on, I've got to tell you the price of gold today is at $3,312 an ounce, and silver is at $33 an ounce. Now, a lot of you out there haven't listened to me. I've been talking about this since gold was at $1,800 an ounce. Gold's going to go to $4,000 an ounce pretty quick. And then from there, it's going to go to $6,000 an ounce. It's still cheap. If you go to Swiss America on our website, and Chris, I want people to see this book. I'm going to insist that you get a copy of this book. I wrote it 2 years ago. It's happening now. Okay, and what Swiss America will set up for you a self-directed IRA where you can get gold and silver held in assets in a Delaware deposit, get some of your assets out of the stock market. Okay, if you've got mutual funds in the stock market in your IRA, or you can switch to a bond fund. Well, the bonds are just as much trouble because after Biden had $34 trillion, our bonds are about to be downgraded. Who wants to hold treasury bonds? They've just paid off with more treasury bonds. Okay, and Trump is trying to get a desperate hold on this spending to get it in rein, and we're going to have to deal with an international credit crisis because there's too much debt. Now, this book, How the Coming Global Crash Will Create an Historic Gold Rush, you can get by calling 1-800-519-6268. 1-800-519-6268 at Swiss America. Write it down. 1-800-519-6268. Talk with the reps there. They are not pushy salesmen. You will own real gold and silver, not a certificate of gold and silver. You're going to own, and it'll be held in a depository for you physically. Gold and silver are going to go up, and stocks and bonds are going to go down. And that's just going to be a fact. The stock market closed yesterday down. And let me see where it was yesterday at close. Hold on, I'll pull it up and tell you exactly where it was. It was at 40,368 Dow Jones Industrial Average. Okay, and what that means is I think the stock market's going to start trading at 35,000. If it does that, you've lost 10,000 points. You've lost 1/4 of all your savings, all your retirement, and it won't be easily recovered. Not coming back immediately. Okay, so go to Swiss America. You can, if you do become a customer, you can also take advantage of this one-time offer for new customers of the Walking Liberty $50. They're 99.99% silver. Swiss America is offering them to you virtually at what they are worth in silver. So as a loss leader for Swiss America, and it's a good deal. So you can get some gold and some silver. You can hold the silver in your hands right there with having 250 of these coins. That precious metals are going to go up in value, and you're going to see the stock market take a nosedive. Okay, now a couple other stories which are just really important over here on Zero Hedge's coverage. Zero Hedge is a good source of news. You want to kind of get a general flow for what's really happening. We're seeing several things that I think are critical. China is actually now opening the door to re-engage Trump in trade talks. So Trump also has brought China to the knees. Tariffs are not a bad idea. They're brilliant. They're going to bring our manufacturing jobs back to the United States. They're going to bring investment back to the United States. Company after company is announcing they're coming back to the United States to open plants. Okay, so you're going to see the dollar bubble burst. Peter Schiff is warning about it, saying this is the collapse I've warned about for years, the collapse I've been warning about for years. It's happening. Okay, the debt bubble is going to burst. And then finally, this Turkish admiral is NATO's become a reckless zombie alliance. Well, sure, it's become a zombie alliance. And by the way, J.D. Vance ripped Zelensky a new one yesterday, which he definitely deserved after that, smart jerk 60 Minutes interview that Zelensky did, in which he's acting as if he's something other than a comic actor. Zelensky's fighting for his life. He sold the rare minerals rights in Ukraine to oligarchs like Pinochet and Kolomoisky. Pinochet was also the first of the oligarchs to go after Hillary Clinton and her foundation in 2013. Okay, and what Zelensky did with Kolomoisky, who was private bank, he stole a lot of money from the United States government. In fact, it was a big foreign aid, millions of dollars from that Vice President Biden got to go to Ukraine for Burisma, where his son was on the board. And that money was stolen because it was deposited in private bank, and Kolomoisky laundered it through Cyprus and other places, and it was gone. Okay, so in the 60 Minutes, Zelensky talking about the war in Ukraine, which he wants to continue. He's going to have the French come in with troops. Yeah, well, they'd be better off. The French could more easily hold a transgender parade by the Eiffel Tower than they could field an army that was capable of fighting Russia and Ukraine. So Zelensky whined, and this guy's gotten to be a real irritating little SOB. Wants to continue the war, killing people so he can stay alive, because he can't deliver to the oligarchs that he promised would get the natural minerals of Ukraine when the United States took over after the lost war, but he still was wanting billions and billions of dollars to come into Ukraine, killing people, conscripting Ukrainians to go fight against the Russia in a killing field. So Zelensky was whining that, quote, alternative reality had taken hold within the Trump administration. Yeah, well, the alternative reality is in Zelensky's confused crackhead. He said, I believe, sadly, Russian narratives are prevailing in the U.S. Oh, Russia, Russia, Russia. Now Zelensky's on it. Well, Zelensky's a criminal, and he's killed millions of people that didn't need to be killed. This war in Ukraine never had to be fought. And then he launched an attack against Vance, claiming without evidence that Vance was somehow justifying Putin's actions. So Zelensky's out there running the Russian collusion theme. I guess he didn't get the memo that theme was now under criminal investigation or national security investigation with potential for treason charges. Zelensky, good luck. The way to handle Zelensky is to take his money away from him. Okay, Vance basically said, I think it's sort of absurd for Zelensky to tell the U.S. government, which is currently keeping his entire government and war effort together, that we are somehow on the side of Russia. That's what Vance said. That doesn't mean you morally support the Russian cause or you support the full-scale invasion, but you do have to try to understand that what are the strategic red lines, the same way you have to understand what are the Ukrainians are trying to get out of the conflict. He called Zelensky's vile comments not productive. Oh, that's the most kind designation of Zelensky, who is trying to cause World War III. So the quicker we can cancel Zelensky's ticket as president, get him out of there, hold a real election in Ukraine to get a legitimate president, maybe we can bring this war to an end. But between Macron, who, by the way, who's married to an older man, that's an open secret in Europe, wants to put on a dress himself and go fight in Ukraine, that'll be the day. I doubt if Macron's capable of doing anything like that. He'll come whimpering to Trump pretty soon, begging for fair treatment so we don't tax his French wine beyond the ability for average Americans to buy it. Okay, so what's going on in Ukraine is going to come to an end, because if Trump takes the money away, the war ends. It's the same with the Democrats. If Trump takes the money away, when they're funneling it through their NGOs, stealing money from the U.S. government, they'll go away. We're beginning to see some justice, and it's about time. In the end, God always wins. God will win here too. As Dr. Jerome Corsi today, it's It is Wednesday, April 16th, 2025, an historic day when the election security fraud has now become a national security emergency. Thank you for joining us. CorsiNation.com will be back tomorrow. God bless.